Hey everyone, Tim Nussbaumer here. Just want to, before the episode, let you know, unfortunately, we had some sound issues on this particular episode. In fact, Jonathan's mic was in and out and eventually just went totally out. So, despite that, there was some really good conversation in the episode. So, we still wanted to put it out and edit it down to where it needed to be. And so, hope you enjoy it despite all that. And have a great week, everyone. With that, let's get started. Welcome to Roots and Relevance. My name is Tim, and with me today are Wally and Annah. Welcome, guys. Good to see everybody. We had some technical difficulties, but we are finally back online to talk about Meat Lego Meat Lego Gnosticism. That's right. You heard it right. Meat Lego Gnosticism, which is such a strange combination of words that I keep saying meatloaf instead of meat Lego. And this term came from an article that I sent you guys from Christianity Today. The article critiques what it's calling Tech Utopianism, that treats bodies as being modular. And so I'm just going to read a couple quotes from the article. The first one is this. It says, "Technology promises liberation from the pesky challenges of being human, such as motherhood," argues Harrington, "in favor of Meat Lego Gnosticism, where we can disassemble and reassemble ourselves like fleshed Lego bricks to find an authentic, self-made individuality. Such liberation promises utopia in terms of equality, freedom, and a lack of consequences, but it ends up more akin to Frankenstein's monster." Yeah, I guess before we go too far, I don't want to assume when we're throwing around terms like embodiment that we actually are thinking the same thing and know the same thing. So I'm curious, how would you define embodiment? Because this article is going to obviously push and say that technology is pulling us away from that, and that's a bad thing. So what does that concept mean for you guys?
I could start. I think embodiment is, it's sort of in the word taking on a body or having a body, right? And when we talk about this in the Christian sense, Christ's incarnation is the historical event that makes embodiment, our bodies matter. But I also think there's a piece of embodiment that really points towards what the limitation of being in a body is, which includes things like eventual degradation, eventually death. Those are parts of being in a body. So when we think of it, I think we have to hold both the fact that the incarnation makes this matter a whole lot. There is a lot of significance about having a body. And also what that comes with is a set of conditions of finiteness in terms of using, being in.
I also think there's a integration, and it's just not. This is not just a vehicle for the soul, right?
Right.
That it becomes like an integration of body, soul, mind, and spirit. I think that's part of the embodiment aspect. That this is just not the shell. This is what Gnosticism was, right? The body's just a shell. It could be done with however you want to treat it, because that's not the important thing. The important thing is the soul, so that's what's going to live on. Where the Christian idea, the Hebrew idea, Christian idea is that this body is part of the wholeness of the human body, soul, mind, and spirit. It's all intertwined and integrated in such a way that it's all important.
Let me ask this. I love how you guys are defining it, and also the fact, Anna, you're bringing up the idea too, that it's kind of a mixed bag in the sense we're finite, we're fragile. And this article is talking about tech taking us away from embodiment. When it comes to things that are making us frail, though, is it wrong then for tech that helps us keep our embodiment healthy and well? Is that bad, or is that a good form of tech? Does that make sense? So in other words, if my arm gets cut off and I get a prosthetic arm and now I'm robot-like, is that a bad thing? Or where do we draw the line on that?
I think there's an inherent assumption, even in the question, that limitedness is bad, that there's a moral assignment to being limited or fragile or finite, which I'm not sure that this is tricky, right? This is like goes into disability theology, it goes into things that we do to other people to limit people's full expression of selves. So I want to be careful with my words, but I do think it depends on how we think about whether we're meant to be finite or whether we're meant to be infinite. Because if we think we're meant to be infinite, then of course, the ways that tech can supplement or enhance those aspects would only be seen as good. But there's a bit of a balance to consider in what does it mean to remove ourselves from the condition of limitedness that we were created and ordained with.
And it's interesting because like the end goal is the same in Christian theology, right? Like in other words, we are infinite, but like not in a way like of us creating tech to make these bodies infinite. It's our hope is resurrection, and that, resurrection bodies that like live forever. These days I feel like most Christians talk about like the hope of heaven. And I get it. I don't think that's language. That's not New Testament language. Like the hope in the New Testament is resurrection, which is embodiment. It's us, in a real body, in a real place. C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, where his picture of heaven is one that is actually more real, not less. It's not like floating around on the clouds. That kind of hits against the whole Gnostic idea. So the article talks about technology taking us away from that. Examples of that, and I know before you talked about some of the things that you've experienced with that as well, but how are ways that you're seeing the danger of tech and helping us not stay grounded in the physical world?
Yeah. I have some thoughts in two separate categories, at least, that, matter a lot to me. One is in the form of how we do church, right? I do think that the gathering in person does matter. And just to give an example, in the Orthodox Church, the liturgy is extremely participatory and it's extremely sensory. And so you miss out on the components of like, the communal responses to the priest, the hymns that you sing together, the chanting that you do together, and the smell of the incense, the feel of.
If you do incense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Representing Christ. Like there's all these things that you see, there's colors, there's even, I think we talked on the last episode that I was on about the feel of being barefoot inside of a church, like literally the ground, right? Your actual physical body is sensing that as you're standing. That's one. And then the other is just in the patterns of socialization for young people that we've seen across the last 15 years in the era of smartphones. Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this in the book, The Anxious Generation, but the way that you've moved from a play-based childhood, which was all three-dimensional with other people, touching, it involved all of the senses, to something that's much more 2D, much more screen-based, and even the interactions that you do have are devoid of the same kinds of sensory inputs, which develop us differently. It makes us think differently about one another. It creates, new conditions of interaction.
There's a reason that one of the images of the church is we're called the body of Christ, right?
Right.
That we're physically present with each other. And when we're physically present with each other, we are modeling or manifesting the reality of Christ in the body, intangible, and what it means to live out life together. And so I think we like to have these online worship services in order to make us feel good about, well, we're reaching people.
Right.
But what are we producing and how we're reaching them in those ways? And are we actually producing people that are actively participating in the body of Christ? Because I can't say that your nose helps me smell if it's not a part of my body.
Right. Which assumes proximity.
Yes.
It assumes presence. Like
yes.
I know we all remember when COVID came and churches had to pivot to doing Facebook Live and streaming it. And I remember the first week or two, there was like a novelty to it of like people like, oh, this is really great. I think for most people, though, that wore off really, really, I can speak for myself, that wore off really, really fast with this desire to like yearning to be back in person because of that. It's not the same.
But then we've trained people. That's as real experience in worship online as it was be a part of the body present physically with them.
Correct. To the point that some people never came back.
That's right.
Yeah. They never came back presently to church.
That's right.
I can just watch it.
That's right.
Watch it online.
And that's what our expectation of people is. You just passively sit and watch, and you're part of the church. Well, that's not the New Testament understanding of church. It's not the New Testament understanding of the purpose and the goal of individual members of the church as we're working together to fulfill Christ's missions for the church. So.
Totally. Yep. Any other thoughts on that? I'm going to read this other quote, which I think is very, very related. It says, also from the article, it says, to presume that our current digital technologies are simply neutral tools is to naively underestimate both the power of sin and the power of God. Writer Paul Kingsworth calls the pervasive power, quote, the machine, which is a tendency within us made concrete by power and circumstance, which coalesces in a large agglomeration of power, control, and ambition. I think it's really interesting that the article talks about the message is the medium and that it's not a neutral thing. And I'm curious, like, do you look at it that way as well? In other words, is technology neutral and you can either use it for good or for bad, or is it something different, like it's argued for in the article?
Neil Postman, years ago in Amusing Ourselves to Death, said the medium becomes the message.
Right.
And I think the medium by which something is communicated becomes as much a part of the message as what's being said through the medium.
Yeah.
So thus, when we share those things through those mediums, then we encourage people to sit back in their own comfort area.
Consume.
Yes, and consume.
Right. Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? It's funny. I have to say, I think I've actually changed my viewpoint on this even in the last 6, maybe 9 months. Because if you had asked me this even a year ago, I would say, no, AI is neutral, that it can be used for good and for bad. And part of this isn't just for me theological. It's just looking and seeing what's happening. It almost feels like it's a force that pushes us in a bad direction. Kind of, when I've heard people say that about money. Money is neutral. It's, can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Of course, money can be used for good. But that does not acknowledge the fact that actually money is not neutral. Money it is a force that, left unchecked, is actually a really, really negative. I feel AI and tech is a similar monster, right? That it's pushing us in directions that if we're not really, really careful, it is actually going to take us away from being fully present with other people. And we were talking about before the podcast how there are certain benefits to our new culture, like there are less abortions now. There are less pregnancies now. There's less drug abuse now. But it's not, it's because people are not actually being present with each other. They're just kind of retreating to their rooms. And so, yeah, any other thoughts on that before we go into the passage, which is actually going to speak directly to this?
I just want to balance the conversation just to say, I don't think that we can name that all technologies, digital technologies are bad, for lack of a more nuanced word. There are just so many things that are happening now because of technology. There's so many new ways that people are connecting. I've talked, physicians who came here 50, 60 years ago, and at the time of their training when they first came here, and they came from overseas, they came from India or other countries, and at that time, there was no way to talk to their families for months and months and months at a time. And now, just in their lifetime, the technology now exists to call, not just voice, but video call family around the world the same way that you would anywhere else, right? I also know about things like 3D printing for bone grafts. Now we can do things like that. So I don't think that we can just name technology or even digital technology or AI. But I do think the piece that we're not considering is what is the human bent in all of this? Where are the incentives and what are our inner motivations and inclinations, and where does that lead us when we have this thing that is extremely powerful, like you said?
Yeah. I mean, the problem has always been not necessarily with the tech. It's us not knowing when to say enough. That is not, going back to Babel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bricking bricks, as it says in Hebrew, wasn't the problem. It was when they just kept building up, right? And it was not knowing when to say when. And I think you're absolutely right. Like technology for phone calls or even a video call, like around the world, that's amazing. But then we take it to the next step and go, okay, we're actually going to do virtual church, which is VR church, which a few churches have toyed around with. In these churches, they do literally virtual communion. So they're not actually drinking and eating. They're pretending to eat and drink. There are virtual baptisms. And I think that should cause us a little bit of a pause, I think, to go, wait a minute. Okay, like we're really missing something sacramental.
I can't remember if I sent the article about the AI Jesus website that you have this AI that will talk to you as Jesus would it would talk to you as Jesus would respond to somebody via, I guess, the AI through taking the scriptures and how Jesus responded to people. And
oh wait, you're saying that's bad? I need to stop my app. I'm kidding.
I don't.
Yeah, that's pretty messed up. Yeah, and in fact, in Switzerland, in Lucerne, they did an entire worship service that was just run by an AI, like pastor, like priest or whatever. And it was a little tongue in cheek. I think it was kind of a social experiment, but also very dystopian view of like where we could be headed. So let's, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I think one kind of good guiding question for like what something is doing to us would just be, what is it replacing? Like if you're taking a video call and it's replacing no connection with your family, right? Then there's almost like an inherent guidance about like, do things that connect you more with people, because the alternative would be no connection. But then virtual church is like, what is it replacing? It's replacing embodied presence. And one of those is more human than the other. So like, where's the direction of the humanity?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great filter. Let's segue then into the scripture. If you guys have it, we're going to be in John chapter 1. To state the obvious, like we're going to do verses 1 through 14. We're not going to be able to do a deep dive into every part of this because there is so much. But I think it's pretty relevant to what we've already been talking about. So let's we'll start with the first 5 verses, and we have John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5.
Yes.
Go for it. If you can read.
I am reading it from the ESV this morning. John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.
Okay, so obviously beautiful passage here, and we always pay attention to repeated words, and clearly the word that's repeated is word. And so what are we to make of the fact that John's sort of first thing here is the word? Like what does that mean, and what is that, like, why does he keep repeating that over and over again?
Well, I think the first 3 words are important too.
Oh yeah.
In the beginning, what does that hearken one back to? It's creation. That this creation was created by God, for God. And
was John just getting cocky here? Like, I'm going to rewrite the Bible in my own way?
No, it was intentional. I mean, it's intentional just to say this, what God is doing in creation, he is doing through someone or something, the word. But it's also, creation is happening again now through this person again.
Right. It's new creation. It's the inauguration of new creation is basically.
Or the new covenant, as we talked about last podcast.
Exactly. And there are even more clues as you go on in the passage that he's talking about some sort of new creation. He talks about days, right? I think, day 7 is mentioned, maybe beyond like where we go, but like it's very clear that he's, trying to show us that a new creation is taking place. And think about this. Way back when we talked about Genesis on the podcast, we talked about how God was moving into the garden, right? And it was temple imagery in the garden. And in this account, Jesus is the temple. He is the presence of God now in new creation. I just think that's really, really
But
cool.
Why did he choose the word logos there? Why don't you just say Jesus?
Yeah.
Why intentionally use a Greek term that is preloaded with meaning in culture, right?
He could have just said, in the beginning was Jesus.
That's right.
And Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God.
So why is he choosing logos there?
I mean, I thought one of the cool things is, and I had heard this before, but I had not thought of it in forever, is that this would have had two different meanings for the two different audiences, right? Jews would have thought immediately of the wisdom character, which had divine elements, but not physical, like Jesus. And the word for the Greeks would have been the rationale or the reason, right? And they would have been very familiar with that. And I think John, by using the word, captures both of those, right? That it's wisdom and it's the logic and the rationale of life.
Well, I did something that I don't usually do. I did some research for this week's podcast.
Nice.
And Herod, a early philosopher around 5th or 6th century BCE, understood as logos, I could just quote, is the universal rational structure or principle that underlies reality. So this is, I mean, there's a rationality, there's a reason, there's a purposefulness behind the reality that we experience. And then we Stoics coming on later on, a couple of that an organizing force in the universe. It is immanent, it is present, it is active, as their understanding of logos. The goal dimension to logos. And as they like to say, it's the seeds, it's the logos spermaticus. It's the seeds of logos dispersed in nature, the guiding growth, moral formation over all things. And then you see Philo using it as in very similar terms. He brings it much more in line with sort of what we understand within the Christian and structure, philosophical thought. But he doesn't see it as eternal. He sees it as one of the first created things. And this is where John says, I mean, we have John coming in here. It says the Word with God in the beginning, and the Word was God. And so we see this evolution of the thought that how John is using this term in understanding how the culture would understand, especially in the Greek culture.
And for Jews at that time too, didn't they also believe that wisdom was created, not necessarily eternal?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know in Proverbs it talks about,
the wisdom personified, right?
But I don't know. It's something
I just wonder how
research.
shocking this would have been, to whether Greek or Jew to hear, like right at the beginning, these words. In the beginning was the Word. And I know the early church, this is where they formed their theology of the Trinity. At least this was one of the primary passages. It's all right there. So great. Anything else on this first 5 before we move to verses 6 through 13? All right, Wally, or who had, you did the last one?
I did. I read.
Anna, do you have that verses 6 through 13?
Yep. I'm starting in verse 6. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God.
It's great. We started off with all this beautiful language, very lofty ideas. And then all of a sudden it just kind of feels interrupted. Like, oh, by the way, there's John. And he's John the Baptist, the first Southern Baptist. And he comes as a witness to testify to Jesus. I'm like, why do you think in the middle of this like heavy theological piece, we're interrupted with, by the way, there's John? Like what is the reasoning there? Like, why is that happening?
I was just going to say, I think this is just like literarily, this is like a transition or a connection passage, right? These verses between this, like you said, heavy theological first 5 verses, which I think, Wally, you're exactly right that these are preloaded words. And that's the reason that they're being used, because the kind of theological discussion around there was a man named Jesus would be far less than what we've just had. So it's between that and between like in, where this is talking about the testimony of John, this is talking about the interaction of John. And so there has to be some context for people about what John is doing here and why his life experiences, thoughts connect, or how his life experiences and thoughts connect with the Word in the beginning.
It's good. It's good.
I mean, don't the Old Testament prophets prophesy about the one that's to come? But before the one that's to come, there's going to be one that's going to be a prophet that's going to be making known the one that's to come. Yeah,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I think John is as much as he used logos for the Greek culture, he's bringing in the Jewish culture by saying, hey, this reality of Jesus, it's real because all these things that have been talked about by the prophets about the one that's going to come before the one that's to be the Messiah is going to be prophesying. And I think this is part of the reason that he's bringing in John the Baptist into this discussion. Let's face it, John was probably writing this probably prior. The Apostle John was probably writing this letter prior to being exiled to Patmos. And so this is happening at Ephesus, which was a Greek city with a high Jewish population. So he's got a mixed culture that he's trying to dialogue with.
Right. And one of the things that I saw too, it's also possible that there were groups of people that were elevating John to the level of Jesus, right? Or to the level of Messiah. And this section almost reads as, oh, by the way, like John was sent to show who God was, but like it's also very clear, verse 8, he himself was not the light.
Mm-hmm.
He came only as a witness to the light. So he's coming in total humility as a pointer to, and it could be John's way of going, hey, like let's make sure we understand the roles. God, the Word, not God, right? And so there could be some of that going on as well. Anything else in that section before we get to kind of the main verse that we want to talk about?
Is 11 talking about, I mean, I guess 11 is talking about Jesus, not John, right? I mean, we've made a transition from John to Jesus, right? He came to his own and his own did not know him. I think back to, I read Psalm 19 yesterday. You know, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim his handiwork. Day to day they pour forth speech. There's not a tongue in which doesn't understand the reality of this God that's created everything. And you just go, we see Simon at the temple recognizing Jesus. We see, I can't think of the lady's name in the temple. We see all these people recognizing the reality of who Jesus is, but he's come to his own creation, and his own creation hasn't recognized him, didn't recognize him.
Yes.
I think that's very interesting.
And I think that's an important point, because I know this passage has been taken in the past by some in the Christian commentator world, and it's become almost against the Jews in a sense of like it's talking specifically about the Jews, but I think it's much more about humans. Like our condition is one that we're not going to recognize unless God opens our eyes to that.
If also created, that he's created everything. He's created us humans. So shouldn't us humans recognize our creator when we meet him?
100%. Yeah. So good. All right.
Let's actually go then to the main verse. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth.
All right. So what comes up for you there as you hear that verse? I mean, it's packed with meaning. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. What does that sounds great, but what does it mean?
Is the word dwelling there tabernacled?
It is. Yep. Eugene Peterson, who translated that in his paraphrase version of moved into the neighborhood, which I always love that. God moved into the neighborhood. He tabernacled with us. Yeah. What else in there? We already talked about the word. What does it mean, flesh? Does that just mean what, skin and bones?
As Annah's already shared about, the incarnation, this shows the importance of participating with your fellow creation, right? That God saw it so important that he had himself in the form, he had God, the Son, come in the form of flesh to dwell among his people, that it was that important for him to tabernacle, to dwell in a human body with divine nature, that he might be able to live life among us. How important is that? If God himself saw that as that important, how much more should as we as believers desire that for each other, but also just as humanity, that it's important for us to dwell physically with each other.
Interesting. So in other words, it's not just making, in your mind, it's not just making a point of what God did, but it's also a model for us as we relate to each other. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think so.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea of Jesus as incarnating in human form is the model for all of humanity, right? This is true across many Christian traditions and the way that we think about what we're headed towards, why we live the way that we do as Christians, why we think the way that we do as Christians. In Orthodoxy, like this goal is theosis, right? Becoming like God, like as intended, right? This is not it's a different kind of like God than the Babel form of now seeing, knowing, being able to do all, but becoming perfected in the humanity that we were intended to be, union with. Yeah. And so this model of perfect human to come and really to condescend rather than saying like humans are getting it wrong, let's just take them up out of the circumstances, rather than that to say, no, I'm going to come be with you. I'm going to come dressed like you and dressed in this humanity, clothe myself in your humanity to come and be among.
That would have been shocking, I'm guessing, right? For this audience to hear that, like whether Greek or Jew, because the Jews, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they did not have an understanding. They had an understanding of Messiah coming, but they didn't have an understanding of God coming like in flesh. And so I think that would have been very, very difficult to sort of wrap your minds around, because that was pretty radical.
Tim Mackey has sort of helped me think through the process of the whole narrative of Scripture and what's the goal and what's the purpose. And I mean, if you haven't, I know it takes some time, but he has classes from Genesis 1 to Genesis 50, and I'm working through the flood narrative right now. And for him, it's the process of getting back to Eden where heaven and earth are one.
Right.
And here in this passage, we see two examples of heaven and earth becoming one, right? We see the Word becoming flesh, the Logos, Jesus, God in the form becoming flesh, heaven and earth.
Which is analogous to the temple. It's
right.
the same thing as what you're talking about.
Yes.
The temple was also earth coming
So we see this among us, tabernacled. That's another place where heaven and earth, where God meets with his people above the mercy seat, where the justice and mercy of God is manifested in a real way in the middle of his people, right? So I think even now John is painting the picture of what this ultimate goal of God in this creation is to be. It's going to be this union of heaven and earth in a new creation, in a restored and redeemed creation, and it's going to be done through a man, but not just any man. He is the Messiah. He's just not any Messiah. He is God in the flesh, the only one that's able to manifest this reality and bring this about.
Which cuts against Gnosticism. It cuts against the idea that somehow around on clouds and things that are spiritual are better and higher than presence and messiness and the physical aspects of this life. I don't know I know some of us have talked about this. Anna, did you see a couple weeks ago that the rapture was like imminent? Did you?
Yeah, it came and went. Yeah, 23rd September, 24th, something like that.
When I lived in New Jersey, I forgot what's the name of the guy that lived in, I think, Pennsylvania. Is it Harold Camping? I think he would put up these big billboards and like put dates up as well. Is like rapture theology, is it Gnostic? I know like we might be getting into some like controversial sort of theology here, but I'm curious, like it feels the opposite of like incarnation. It feels like the goal of rapture theology is that this earth is bad, get me away from it, and I want to escape it. Am I seeing that wrong? Or maybe you can add some nuance to that.
I mean, listen to any of the songs that came out in the early 20th century. It's all about heaven. It's just about heaven and glory road to heaven. And I just get a cabin, a little log cabin in the corner of heaven somewhere. It's about escape.
Which is funny because, again, that's not New Testament. Like we always talk about heaven, and I'm not saying heaven's not in the New Testament. It's just not the predominant.
Heaven is not the goal.
Right.
heaven and earth becoming one is the goal.
Correct. What was that 80s song? Heaven is a place on earth. Do you remember that?
Yes, I can hear the girls singing it right now. I can't think
Wait,
of
how does it go, Wally? Can you sing it for us?
Oh, heaven is a place on earth.
Hey, that's not bad.
That's
good.
good.
Yeah.
That's why they pay me the big bucks. So
It was when I started reading like Into Your Right, I'm like, hey, that song was actually much closer theologically than I'll Fly Away.
which is a great song, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. But I just think I'm not saying all rapture theology is this, but there was definitely a version where the idea of rapture theology is like this world doesn't really matter that much. We don't have to worry about the environment because it's all going to be burned up anyway. And we're going to be like one day out of here. And again, to me, this seems the opposite of being incarnational, of a God that comes down, of a heaven at the end of the story, where the end of the story is not us going up. The end of the story is heaven coming down, right?
I think it was Tim Mackey that said it's not that it's a new creation, but God is saying, I'm making all things new. That he's not destroying the old and bringing something new. No, he is restoring that which was not whole and was broken and flawed, and he's restoring those things to
right. This goes to that. There are two different words for new, right? And one of them is brand new, like of a different kind, and one of them is like a renewal. And I believe that one is the renewal one. I'd have to check that. But that's the idea, right? Is there's a restoration.
So why do you think John, at the beginning of his gospel, goes here with the idea of Christ, mediator of creation? Why not just sort of start like, in Matthew, we have the genealogy of Jesus, which is showing he is from the lineage of David. And we see in Luke's version, that he is just, it talks about the birth of John the Baptist and all the circumstances surrounding that, and the birth of Jesus. Why start here?
What's John's angle?
What's John doing here? That Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics as we like to call them, didn't choose to do. Why is Mark starting here in the story of Jesus?
John,
Sorry, why is John doing this?
Yeah, thoughts. I mean, that's a great question. I think there's probably multiple answers to this. I do, John was Jewish, and so I think he says the hardest part like first almost, because this I think would have been, especially for the Jewish audience, really a bomb, like going off of like this is who this Jesus is, and I think part of what he wants to get across, and then I think the Genesis piece. He's brilliant in that way, that he's certainly getting across that as big of a deal as creation was, this is the next hinge point in history. I think it's almost apocalyptic language of like, hey, here is the pivot point. We talk a lot about chiasms in scripture. This is the center of the chiasm, is Jesus, is the center of the chiasm. He is the pivot point in history. And I think using this sort of language gets that across. But yeah, any other thoughts or angles?
I feel like John's goal here is a little different than the goal of the writers of the synoptic gospel accounts, because what they're sharing, what they're seeing and experiencing is a little bit different, partly because of their relationship to Jesus and, who is seeing what, but also in what they're trying to convey to their audiences. And this is a much more theological account. There's so much more that is explanatory of the purpose of why Jesus came, and all of the kind of analogies and all the figurative language in this writing as well is just a different genre of writing than the experiential accounts that the other gospel account writers use. So I think it's similar, and it's called a gospel account because it is about Jesus and it does convey a lot of the same stories. But what John is doing in this writing feels almost fundamentally different than what's happening in the others.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's written a little bit, most scholars believe it's written later. And so there's more words now, like theological, there's been some time now to kind of wrap their minds around like this is like our theology, and I feel like that's happened to a point where John's able to write about this in a very different way.
I mean, right off the bat, you're seeing John is putting forth Jesus as God.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
right? There's no doubt that what John's purpose is this is not just Messiah, but this Messiah is God.
Right.
And we see the organizational principle, 7 signs, the turning the water to wine, and all the different signs that we see that he's organizing, how he is portraying Jesus to be not only Messiah, but that God. So when Thomas in John chapter 20 says, "Ha kurios mu, ha theos mu, my Lord and my God," for a good Jewish man to look at another man and call him God, right? That says this is the point that John is trying to get at, that Jesus was not just a Messiah and a good teacher and somebody that thought himself to be, the Moshiach, but this is the Messiah, and this Messiah is God.
Cuts against I like Jesus as a teacher, and he's a great example. John's saying the opposite. No. He's all that, but he's more. He's a lot more.
There's also a lot of John's self in his writing. There's a naming of his role vis-a-vis Jesus that doesn't happen in the others as well. Like there is I am preparing the way, and the one who comes after me, I would be worthy of untying his sandals. Those words and the baptizer role, right? Like these things are big things and big differences.
Totally. Well, let's just talk for a minute. I think a good way to end this is to talk like reality, and let's specifically think about the church in North America. What are ways that we can look at incarnation and act in ways that are in line with the scripture? And what are some ways maybe the American church is falling short in that, and that we're not doing what we should be as being an incarnational people and a family of God? What are some of the challenges, and what are practices that help us?
I know you're trying to narrow the question by saying North America, but North America is still massive. And there are many kinds of worshiping communities in North America.
That's fair. Let's stick to what we know more of, because I don't want to speak for Catholics. I would be horrible at that. But
sure.
Two kind of broad groups, right? With
Yeah.
and evangelicals in general. Jonathan is beginning to learn Anglicanish.
Did you go to that church now?
I did. And it said because I'm not going to get the wording right, but it was this idea because we believe in presence. We believe in tactile things that you can touch. And so I just found that very interesting because a lot, and it's not just Jonathan's Anglican church, a lot of the newer Anglican churches are doing both. And how about for you? I'm interested because you've two kind of different worlds with that. Spoiler alert, I think Orthodox Church gets this part better in a more comprehensive way than the tradition that I grew up in. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
The way that I sort of think about it is the word liturgy, liturgia, the work of the people is what that word means. And I think Orthodox people take that very seriously. It is the work of the people, not of one person, not of one voice. But if people don't show up, it doesn't work. So you can't have just one person on a screen. That's not how this sacrament takes place. And so I think there's a lot of thought, tradition, history that has gone into even how the church looks. When you step into an Orthodox church, there's a particular feel, even in the architecture, even in how the priest and the acolytes are clothed, even in what colors, what designs are part of the physical space itself. And then the layout of the church matters. The physical environment that you're in matters. We believe that the departed, the Orthodox word for the people who have passed away, who have died, are with us and are participating with us in the liturgy. And so there's a physical space, this aisle, in which we believe they participate with us. So I think all these visual and spatial cues contribute to our actual theology of worship. Just to answer the original question of how should this sort of inform how we think broadly, and I think this beyond ecclesial church spaces, but bodies and environments both have to matter. And we see this even in Genesis, even in the creation story. God creates an environment before God creates humans for the environment, right? So there is a garden that's made, that exists, in which Adam and Eve are created. So that kind of significance for both the bodies that we inhabit, which means stewarding them well, protecting ours and other people's well, creating, to bring it like to really practical terms, like creating policies, creating rules for living that honor and dignify human bodies is an important thing. And then taking care of the space around us, both in worship spaces, but also in our neighborhoods and our yeah, exactly, our natural resources.
Anna caused me to think Frank Lloyd Wright has in architecture, there's this idea of form following function, that how you're made is made to work within an environment. And if that's the case, then God has created this world for us. I mean, the original garden was for Adam and Eve to be co-regents and tend and steward this creation, right? Not to create new things, but to tend and to take care of these things that God has created.
Part of their vocation.
And isn't that why we're brought into the church? I love how Tim Mackey talks about that Adam and Eve were made from the dust outside the garden, but placed inside the garden.
Right.
And that imaging of placing, Paul describes the church and how God has placed each one of us within the body to tend and to care for this body that he has given his people. And that if form follows function, then that's what we're supposed to be about. But we've made, especially in our context, church is about seeker-sensitive. Well, I don't want to say seeker-sensitive, but let's get as many lost people as we
stage
can.
and
Yeah, it doesn't sound like the Anglican Church and the Orthodox Church are too much concerned about seeker-sensitive. They don't want to be too weird to the culture, right?
Yeah. So much so that when I visited the Anglican Church here, the first thing they said was not welcome, good morning.
Yeah.
It was, are you Anglican? And I was like, not yet.
I'm trusting you. So I think that, we as North American Christians, we have turned the term embodiment as being a part of the church is to help the church grow as big as possible.
And that's a different thing than being present in.
It's a different thing than do I help the church flourish and function the way it should.
Which requires real community, like
yes.
Actual relationships. And I think, like, amen to everything that all of you have said. I think also for me, the biggest thing we can miss out on is deep relationships with brothers and sisters in Christ by just experiencing church in rows. In other words, like if the only experience I have is in a church of 1,000 and I'm sitting down and watching something on stage, that to me is a little bit disembodied by itself because I'm not able to speak into my brother or sister's life. They're not able to speak into mine in that mode. There has to be more. And that's where relationships, I think, really, really matter. When we left our last church and we were church hopping or church shopping, it did not take long at all. And Rob and I still talk about this because we still feel a little misplaced, disembodied, because we don't have that weekly rhythm of, yes, we're in church every week in corporate worship, but we're missing those deep, like, relationships is so much of what it means to be incarnational and to be present with each other, if that makes sense. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that question of just relevance of Word became flesh? Like, what does it mean for us to be incarnational as a church and individuals?
Well, I think, it's sort of in the threads of redemption that it is only through Christ that this is going to take place. It's not through some process. It's not through some program. It is only by Christ that this is going to happen, that this restoration to each other and to God, the redemption of this creation, the Logos, all these things can only take place through Christ.
Yeah.
It's only through Christ that these things take place.
And that is an answer to what a lot of people are asking, whether they realize it or not, in our country right now. Like, you've probably seen the stats that I have. I think you mentioned Jonathan Haidt earlier. He's done some work and writing on this, on the loneliness epidemic, how the more we're connected online and through social media, the higher it seems like the loneliness factor goes up. And well, because of what you just said, like, we actually have an answer to that. We have true community around Jesus, that we have something to offer people to say that you actually don't have to feel alone anymore. It's interesting. One of the things I've noticed, especially the last 2 years coming out of COVID, I've seen things like supper clubs coming up in different cities that are outside of the church. And I feel like that's almost a way of people recognizing, hey, whatever's happening right now with tech and AI is not good for relationships. And so the people are trying to find avenues of being back in person.
The exclusivity of Christ is a huge thing that John is continually pointing to. Verse 12, but to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave them the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. The reality is this, that the exclusivity of Christ, the Incarnation, is the only method becoming one with God again.
Right.
That this promise through, as we look through Genesis, through Exodus, through Jeremiah, this is coming to fruition in this person, in this time, in this place, in the person and work of Jesus.
And again, it doesn't say a child of God. It says children of God, implying spiritual family, which I think cuts totally against our sensibilities as the church in North America, which is, it's even our language, my personal relationship with Jesus Christ, my personal quiet time. I'm going to try to live a holy life and then go to heaven when I die. Siloed, individualistic sort of mindset. And we're saved for something different. We're saved to, N.T. Wright talks about, we are saved for a new community, a new family that's part of a new creation.
How has God worked through all the scriptures? By forming a people.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
He's forming Adam and Eve to make people to worship and praise his name. He's forming the people of Israel through Abraham. And now he's forming a people that God's not calling individuals. He is forming a people.
Love that. Love that. Any last words from anyone? I think that's a great place to end. I think that's a great, John is painting a great vision for us. And like I said, this is kind of the pivot point in the entire series is this. And then of course, where we're going next, the cross and the resurrection as well. That is the greatest hinge point in history as we're going to see. And so I hope this has at least whet your appetite to dig into the scripture a little bit more. And because there is so much in here. We appreciate you guys listening. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.